you all the work you must be doing to organize these every month. I just recently became aware of them, and it is just absolutely awesome. And thank you for the opportunity to present this material. I've been vegetarian, vegan, and macrobiotic. So I have experienced all three of these. I actually became a vegetarian in 1978. And at that time, people were making a distinction. They weren't using the word vegan, but they were making a distinction between lacto-ovo vegetarian, which meant you ate dairy and eggs, and pure vegetarian. And I was lacto-ovo because I was really oversold on protein and thought I needed it. And oh my God, I'd die without lacto and ovo. So I did that for about 6 years and made my own kefir and did all kinds of things like that, and nearly killed myself with digestive yeast, candida. Um, and at that point, a holistic MD told me to get off dairy, and I essentially became vegan. And maybe a year later, I discovered macrobiotics, and I began to eat a lot of foods that were fermented that the vegan doctor told me not to eat, but I began to find that I was healing and getting better ever so slowly, a point that Cynthia just made. So that's my own background. So what I'd like to—
Cathy, that's so interesting for me because I followed a similar path in the early 70s. I became vegetarian for an interesting story reason. And then from there, a natural doctor told me about being vegan, which lacto-ovo was the same words. I never had heard of that. And that was amazing. I felt so much better. And then after that, I discovered macrobiotics. So similar pathways.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful to find macrobiotics. And here I am, and not, I have a chronological age, but my biological age is much younger, and I'm so grateful for that. So anyway, um, I just want to look briefly at vegetarianism and veganism, and then talk about what's so different and so wonderful, I find, about macrobiotics. So vegetarianism is the most ancient of all, and it has an ancient— I don't know much about the East, but it has an ancient Western history. And it means the theory of practice of living on a diet of vegetables, fruits, grains, nuts, sometimes animal produce, but not animal flesh. And there's a wonderful book that I have used to um, study the history of vegetarianism. It's by a Brit named Colin Spencer, and it's called The Heretic's Feast. Surely an engaging title. And in that book, he says our hominid ancestors, which would be folks like the Neanderthals, evolved over a period of 24 million years. And for all but 1.5 million of them, the evidence we have leaves little doubt that their diet was almost completely vegetarian, except for insects and grubs. The teeth remained more suitable for grinding vegetation, something I think we all know in macrobiotics, and cannot reasonably turn this herbivore into a carnivore. And he talks about how carnivorous eating began. He says it's ways and means of hunting and killing were devised simply through necessity and the urge to survive. And then competition for food caused migration, gave impetus for further hunting skills. And then meat consumption started to have a cultural aura. It became a way to express your dominant ruling power. So it got all mixed up in politics. And the way that vegetarianism began to change was that it began to creep into religious belief. Um, Abstention began to be a way to express a kind of spiritual outlook. In ancient Egypt, for example, you could have belonged to a vegetarian priestly sect from the Old Kingdom, which would be about 3,200 years before the Common Era. But the real impetus for Western style vegetarianism came from ancient Greek culture, with the clearest example being Pythagoras. And you have probably heard his name because, I don't know, I always heard in school about the Pythagorean theorem in math, which was about the three sides of a right triangle and how the hypotenuse was the square of the other two sides. Well, Pythagoras of Samos, that was the least of his exploits. He lived from about 570 to 490 before the Common Era. He was a Greek philosopher, and he was the first Greek to teach the existence of the soul. He saw the soul as abstract beyond all material metaphors that you could use to explain it. He said it was immortal, it could be endlessly transformed into other living creatures. And so he's teaching reincarnation. Um, and he's saying that all life forms, therefore, should be treated as kin. As Colin Spencer puts it, to kill and eat other living creatures would be like murdering and eating your cousins. Um, Spencer writes, all people are reborn in the time flow of life on earth, and the notion that a human being has only one life is an illusion caused by lost memory. Rebirth any number of times happened unless you could break your cycle with strenuous asceticism. So that was really the start of a kind of spiritualized view of vegetarianism, a minority position in the ancient world as now. And the philosophers who taught it began to notice that it brought clarity in thinking and health, um, besides being a way not to eat your cousins. And they also began to reflect that brutalizing animals by slaughtering them led to brutalizing one's self. So I have a few quotes about Pythagoras. Ovid, who was actually Roman, and lived from 43 before the Common Era to 17 of the Common Era. He says, he, meaning Pythagoras, was the first to decry the placing of animal food upon our tables. He was the first to open in such words as these: "Oh, how criminal it is for flesh to be stored away in flesh, for one greedy body to grow fat with food gained from another, or one live creature to go on living through the destruction of another living being." Um, Not mincing any words there. And then we have people who write the life of Pythagoras much later. Another Roman, Diogenes Laertius, writes in the 3rd century of the Common Era, Pythagoras prohibited the eating of animals because he wished to train and accustom men to simplicity of life, so that all their food should be easily, for from this diet they would derive acuteness of intellect. And then the last one, Porphyry, from a book in Latin called De Abstinentia, which means about abstinence. And that's from the 3rd century of the Common Era. He writes, to destroy other things through luxury and for the enjoyment of pleasure is perfectly savage and unjust. And the abstinence from these neither diminishes our life nor our living happily. For if indeed the destruction of animals and the eating of flesh were as requisite as air and water, plants and fruits, without which it is impossible to live, this injustice would necessarily be connected with our nature. So very, very strong denouncements there of eating animals. Um, Jetting over to the US of A, where I am now in lovely California. So I didn't say good evening to you guys because it's morning here. Um, well, we have a bunch of figures that begin to promote vegetarianism, especially in the 19th century. A very colorful Presbyterian minister named Sylvester Graham, um, who was a leader in the temperance movement, the movement to moderate your use of alcohol. And he promoted vegetarianism and talked especially about the use of what he called unbolted wheat flour, which is pretty much a homemade version of what we would call whole wheat flour. And he created a bunch of products based on this: Graham bread, Graham flour, Graham crackers, which you may have heard of. The present day Graham crackers are way different from the ones he was promoting. So he was interested in a pure diet and lifestyle for health reasons. And the big problem then, he was a sexual reformer, and he and other sexual reformers were horrified by the problem of male masturbation because they said that it shortened the lives of men and it led to blindness. And they firmly believed that. And so that's why they promoted this diet that was vegetarian and also free of spices and anything that could be stimulating. So kind of like Zen monks in America. And he founded the American Vegetarian Society in New York in 1850. So his views were widespread. One of the leading revival ministers of the period, a guy named Charles Grandison Finney, who became the president of Oberlin College in Ohio, was a promoter of Graham's views. And in fact, at Oberlin College, they had a vegetarian table. So they had some tables where people could get, the students could get meat to eat. And then they had this vegetarian table because they thought it was so important. And then we have the celebrated Henry David Thoreau, who wrote the book Walden, about a year he spent in 1854 at Walden Pond in Massachusetts. And he has this chapter on his reflections on vegetarianism. And he writes, "I have found repeatedly of late years that I cannot fish without falling a little in self-respect. I have tried it again and again. I have skill at it, and like many of my fellows, a certain instinct for it, which revives from time to time. But always when I have done, I felt that it would have been better if I had not fished." So the chapter is rather inconclusive. It's called Higher Laws, and he goes back and forth on his, he was actually a vegan for a while, but then gave it up. So we get to what is called veganism, which is really a 20th century new word. And we can look to Great Britain for the foundation of the vegan movement. There's a man named Donald Watson, who, Watson, if you're interested. He lived from 1910 to 2005. And he and his friends um, began to realize that producing flesh food and eggs and dairy as well were inextricably linked. So rather than lacto-ovo, which is the way I started out, this was totally vegetarian, pure vegetarian. And in 1944, he formed the first vegan society in Britain. In 1948, the US had its first vegetarian society in Oceano, California. And in 1960, we got an American vegan society. And these people, again, they had spiritual reasons for where they were headed and what they were doing. They used the Sanskrit term ahimsa, which means nonviolence, and they intended to actively practice it. So they abstained from all animal products. They promoted reverence for life. They thought about integrity in thought, word, and deed. They talked about self-mastery and self-control. They talked about service to humanity and nature and creation. And they thought that veganism would bring the advancement of understanding and truth. Well,
Can I interrupt you with a question, Kathy?
sure.
Or would
And,
or would you rather wait?
oh, no, that's fine. I'd love it.
Well, what you're describing right now, this last sentence or two that you just said, brings me to the question that since you spoke about Pythagoras, and I think it was him that he said that the only way to break the cycle of life is through extreme aestheticism. So I'm so curious if you have any sort of idea of why that might do that. Why did he think that that's would take us out of the cycle of reincarnation? And then this description you're giving now also sounds like a kind of, it's not extreme to me, it sounds like a kind of aestheticism in compared to regular society. So it's been this question I've been thinking.
Very, very, very good question. And this view is widespread. And there are in Asian teaching about reincarnation, there is the idea that it is undesirable to be reincarnated. And what you really want to do is to activate better karma so that you can eventually escape the cycle of rebirth. Something I don't agree with. I happen to like being here, but anyway, um, they made the connection between non-desire, non-attachment, and being able to escape. Because what is the world about? It's a kind of cauldron, a bubbling pot of desires. We're attracted to this, we are attracted to that, we are attracted to something else. And if we can somehow manage to rein in these desires and to escape from their attractiveness, their kind of addictive quality, we stand a chance to escape the cycle of reincarnation. So that's kind of the ballpark within which this is all thought out, if that makes any sense. And the other thing is the nonviolence, the ahimsa, not creating horror and pain and violence for other sentient beings. Does that help, Gnat? Are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, it does. I appreciate that. It's a lot to think about.
Okay, the next figure I was actually going to talk about really grills into this. It's an Australian moral philosopher named Peter Singer, who was born in 1946. And so far as I know, he's still a professor at Princeton University. In 1975, he wrote a book called Animal Liberation, and it's subtitled A New Ethics for Our Treatment of Animals. He considered himself a sentientist. That's from sentient beings, SENTIENT, a sentientist. And what this was a position of moral consideration for all sentient beings. And sentient beings were beings that had a capacity for suffering or delight. And he popularized the term speciesism, which he didn't coin, but he anyway popularized it. And speciesism was a description of the practice of privileging human beings over other animals. So for me to think that I'm superior with the three felines I happen to live with would be an example of speciesism. Um, and he argued that there was more difference between a great ape and an oyster than between a great ape and a human being. So fill in the blanks, that means we should have equal consideration for the great apes and for all sentient beings. And he was generally vegan, except sometimes when he traveled and he couldn't be. And he was against animal experimentation. He was against factory farms, especially, and these are sometimes called CAFO, CAFO, controlled animal feeding operations. Um, he thought them to be cruel, unhealthy, and damaging to the ecosystem. So, the other figure I want to point to in the vegan movement would be this would be a segue into John Robbins, an American who was born in 1947. And he popularized the links between what we eat, our health, the environment's health, animal cruelty, and animal rights. In 1987, he wrote a book called Diet for a New America, and it was an expose of those CAFOs, animal factories, factory farming, and what they entailed for animals and the environment and human health. And I will never forget that book because he has pages of photos of how the animals to be slaughtered are raised. And he's famous for these pictures of pig farms where there are cages on top of other cages and on top of other cages, and the pigs have to live with the defecation of the pigs in the higher cages falling on the pigs in the lower cages, and it gets awful. So I don't want to even think about it really. At the present day, though, we have some very interesting developments in the vegan movement. One is the traditional one where you're concerned about animal welfare and compassion. And this means that literally you can eat anything as long as it's not animal or an animal product. I remember showing a film to a group that was vegan, and it was called Vegucated, and it was about somebody, a journalist in New York City, who had decided to run an experiment with people adopting a vegan lifestyle for a short period of time, wasn't more than a number of weeks. And so the film presents one overweight college kid holding up a box of Oreos from a grocery aisle saying, I read the ingredients and they're all vegan. And like we all just groaned because the stuff was so horrible. You know, it was just poison in a package. So that that wideness of use of anything at all, as long as it is not animal, is still part of the vegan movement. And we see that in a lot of processed foods. I until COVID shut us down, I was running, for one reason or another, I was running a vegan meetup out of my church. And I used to shudder when I went because somebody would be sure to bring vegan cheese, and somebody else would have the latest version of Beyond Meat, and a whole lot of products that I don't think are very healthy and very good. And but the vegan movement that focuses on animal welfare and compassion is really organized around activism, environmental issues, the horrors of agribusiness. Um, John Robbins, for example, has a book of essays called No Happy Cows. So that's one side of the vegan movement. The other side, though, is much more focused on health concerns, and it is definitely plant-based in terms of a real horror of the use of processed foods. It's it's led by a bunch of vegan MDs and nutritionists. Its emphasis is on the nutritional content of foods. I was just watching some of a convention this week on Zoom, the National Health Alliance, I think, and speaker after speaker got up with warnings about adding oil and salt and sugar to your diet. They promote things like water fasting. So it's talk about abstinence. It's pretty abstemious, I think, with no oil, no salt, no sugar. And I don't mean just sugar in a sugar bowl. I mean things like maple sugar or rice syrup or anything at all like that, unless it's coming from a fruit that came from a tree. But their interest is in promoting good health, and they address the consequences of poor eating, which we see all around us. Our own bodies suffering from obesity, cancer, heart and circulatory disease, diabetes, arthritis, osteoporosis, etc. And they really want to end all of that. And some of them have done amazing work with people with heart disease, for example, and cancer. So, and especially they were at this meeting when I work in my kitchen and I listen to these speakers, and a lot of them were concerned with obesity, which is, I don't know what it's like in Israel, Ganat, but over here in America, it is a national disease, and it is shocking to walk around and see how overweight people are. So I'll stop for a minute for any questions you might have on veganism or vegetarianism before I turn to macrobiotics. So anybody? Sounds.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Could you repeat that question?
I said I will stop to see if anybody has any questions on veganism or vegetarianism before I move on to talk about macrobiotics.
This isn't a question, but back in those days, the vegetarian veganism also included not wearing anything that was made from an animal and not using. I don't know.
Right. That's
all
absolutely
that.
right. In fact, I always feel a little guilty if I buy a pair of leather shoes, you know, and I have managed to find some absolutely comfortable and delightful shoes that are textile, and they look like they're leather, but they're really not. So, you know, when I can do that, I do. But I do have some animal products, I have to confess.
We've been kind of comparing Jewish values throughout the day to the speakers. And here again, we have on the single most, shall I say, holy or strong, I don't know, it's not really a holiday anyway, of Yom Kippur. Also, we don't wear animal products on that day.
That's great. That's really great. Yeah. I think a lot of it is systemic. Like it's really hard to get away from all animal products. Um, in fact, I was just horrified. The other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who was talking about dental implants, and I don't have any, thankfully, but he was saying that, well, yeah, they use ground up bones from cadavers to make the implant work. And I was like, what? What? So, the way we are organized like to totally be dependent on animals. And it's in fact very difficult to be absolutely, absolutely pure. So, if I don't hear any more questions, I'm going to turn to macrobiotics. And first thing I want to say about macrobiotics is that it has a totally different history. It is in origin not Western, it is Asian. And it it really springs in the long run from Chinese food philosophy, which was a part of the Chinese medical system. And it was transformed by our Japanese teachers, and especially by George Osawa, and in this country from by Michio Kushi and Herman Ihara. And the big difference between macrobiotics and Western style vegetarianism or veganism is that the stress, which is so Asian, is on energy rather than on substance, meaning nutritional values alone. So where the vegan doctors of last week's conference were running on about how many calories was in this food or that food, or how much vitamin C was in it. The Asian view would be to stress the energy of it rather than the substance of it. And I think what has happened in macrobiotics, actually, to be perfectly frank, is that we have kept that stress on energy, but we have also incorporated that Western view of substance. So we do think about nutritional values as well. But the uh, the bigger difference is the vastness of the cosmology, and if I can call it that, the theology that is attached to macrobiotics. George Osawa talked about a spiral of evolution and descent into the physical world. So the spiral of materialization begins with the famous unique principle that splits into and gives rise to yin and yang, which are both complementary and antagonistic. And then through their interaction comes the world of energy or vibration, then pre-atomic particles, chemical elements, the vegetal and animal human worlds. So we're getting contracting spheres as this materialization occurs, and their implosion culminates in humanity. And we have what Osawa and later Kushi called the order of the universe. When I was at the Kushi Institute, we had 5 courses, and one of them was called the order of the universe. And I dare say if you went to a vegan clinic like the Cleveland Clinic, which has the famous heart doctor there, you would not have a lot of study of the order of the universe, nor would you have that in Colin Campbell's nutrition program. So this is a real difference. Michio Kushi adds to that when he starts talking about a natural history of food use and human evolution. And he has this elaborate chart where we start out on the one side with sea moss and algae, sea vegetables, land moss, ancient plants, modern plants, herbaceous plants, and cereal grains. And on the other side, we have sea invertebrates, sea vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and then human beings. So what he does is he equates the coming of cereal grains with the coming of human beings. And that becomes a real reason to make grain the principal food in your diet, because the grain came with us, and it is therefore most compatible with us, most evolved with us. And then we have an astrological component that is inherited from Asia and Japan in 9-star key. And we also have uh, Kushi teaching what I would call astrological futurism, an elaborate theory based on the Earth's wobble on its axis and galactic cycles, as he calls them. And Kushi teaches that once every 25,800 years, the Earth, which describes an immense cosmic circle, returns to the same point in alignment with Polaris, the North Star. And as the Earth moves through its heavenly course en route back to Polaris, it receives different energies and vibrations from the galaxy and its constellations. So energy once again. And this process makes its mark on how humans think, feel, and behave in relation to one another and the planet. And Kushi taught that for the last nearly 13,000 years, with the North Pole pointing more or less toward the star Vega, humankind has been passing through a time of struggle in the Great Circle. But by the year 2100, the Earth will again align with Polaris, and the return to paradise will come. So that is the expectation for the future. So there is immense optimism in the midst of the gloom and doom on the planet within the macrobiotic movement. So that's the cosmological, the theological, you can say. But there's also a political side to macrobiotics, which is way vaster than, again, what the vegan doctors want to do with creating a more sustainable form of agriculture and all of that. And I think it's best encapsulated by a little conversation that happens between Georgia Sawa and Michio Kushi when Kushi was a student in world government at the University of Tokyo. Georgia Sawa, when he first meets Kushi, asks him, have you ever considered the dialectical application of dietary principles to the problem of world peace? And Kushi says, I never thought of that. And Osawa says, you have to study the relations between food and human destiny. Someday you will find that it is the key to world peace. Every week, please come and eat with us. So with all that vast cosmology of the heavens and all that, here we have something so practical, so down to earth. Come and watch what we eat and put the same thing in your mouth, and you might have an answer to this problem of peace that you want. And this haunted Michio Kushi. He wanted to create one peaceful world, and he actually got sidetracked into health concerns. So there was a way in which the basic impetus for the macrobiotic movement was an incredibly vast human issue that he wanted to address one mouth at a time, one person at a time. So that leads into the food style of macrobiotics, which in its way is much more distinctive from the food style of the vegan movement. It's grain-centered, especially focusing on brown rice. It uses sea vegetables, something that I haven't seen except rarely in the vegan movement. It emphasizes local foods. Vegans love their mangoes and bananas and coconuts and Um, I'm speaking from the temperate climate and maybe a sub-Mediterranean climate here in California. But we don't, we don't grow coconuts on our trees, and we don't grow bananas here, and we don't grow mangoes here, and papayas here, and kiwis here. And vegans have no problems with these foods because they are considering the nutritional value and not the energetic value of these foods. And we all know the story about how in hot, hot, hot weather, these fruits might be okay, but certainly in a winter in a temperate climate, you wouldn't want to be eating them. The macrobiotic movement has also stressed organic foods, and something that Ganat brought up when we were first talking about this topic, Japanese food products. Um, Traditionally processed Japanese food products, things like shoyu or things like miso, things like natto. These are tofu. These are traditionally processed food products, and I would argue they're substantially different from chemically processed 21st century foods that you can find in the supermarket. Example, I was just at Whole Foods last week, and I saw, to my amazement, a product called Pump Foo, and I looked at it, and it said it was an alternative to tofu. And whereas tofu might have 8 or 9 grams of protein, nutritional value again, Pump Foo with pumpkin seeds had 17 grams of protein. So get up and cheer. And I immediately got suspicious rather than cheering. Um, and we have these Japanese cooking styles, things like nishime and kimpira, and we make so many distinctions between how we cook and how we use these products. The use of traditional sesame oil and olive oil now are, this is part of the food style of macrobiotics. And we also have a lifestyle that I think is much more finely developed than the lifestyle recommendations that come with veganism. Veganism promotes the non-use of any animal products, like in your shoes, for example. We just talked about that. But we have our famous home remedies that are both internal and external. And just last week, I had an unfortunate event in my kitchen. I had the handle of one pot next to the flame of another pot, and I picked up the pot, and oh my God, did I get scalded, all red palm. And I ran it under cold water, and it was just smarting and hurting. And then I thought, oh, I have tofu in the refrigerator. So I got out my tofu, I cut a thin slab, I plunked it on the palm of my hand. I got a huge bandage and covered it. And then I got a latex glove that I had from the COVID epidemic. And I slept with that on. And by the morning, it was gone. And it was like, it was pretty bad burn. And it was just amazing. And it worked because of the energy principle. The tofu drew out the heat of the burn, and it left my palm intact, and I could do anything I wanted the next morning. I didn't have to worry about it. So internal as well as external remedies. And then we have things like the body rub or the body scrub. We have our use of plants. We have our emphasis. Mishi used to always emphasize play, 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 and enjoy. So all of this is part of our lifestyle. We could go on and point to so many aspects of it. But what I'm trying to suggest is that in macrobiotics, we have a truly holistic way of eating and way of living. It comes with a cosmology and, if you will, a theology attached. It comes with a political impetus attached. It comes with all the concerns about environmentalism that are part of the vegan and vegetarian movements. It comes with a food style and a lifestyle that keeps us centered, balanced, good for the planet, good for us, good for our physical health, good for our mental health. And as far as I'm concerned, it's coming home. It's the best answer to what we need to do to be happy, balanced, wholesome human beings. So that is what I have to say. Do I have time for any questions, Ginad, or what?
Must, yes. I think the big question in the macrobiotic movement, and I think the answer is pretty obvious, is like, why is veganism so popular now and macrobiotics is so hard to spread? I think the answer is because macrobiotics is more complicated and people like simple.
Yes, yes. I myself am vegan, and I wasn't always vegan while I was macrobiotic, but the last several years I have become vegan, and over environmental issues, and also over the fact that I noticed that every time I ate fish, which was maybe once a week, the next day I felt like I had a hangover. And I think it's because even though I got the best quality fish in terms of nutritional content and purity, our oceans are so polluted that, you know, um, there are substances there that my body just doesn't like. So I stopped eating fish.
And
And it's okay. You know, I'm happy the way I am.
now, on the other hand, we greatly stress sea vegetables, and they come from the oceans.
Right.
So, or the sea salt, they also come from the oceans.
Yeah. But we try to, like, you know, I buy Eden Foods stuff a lot, and he tests it so much that I feel pretty confident that it's okay. And I haven't noticed any, like, I haven't noticed hangover from eating aromatic. So,
Also, I would add that seaweed, sea vegetables are actually used to clean up ocean pollution.
Oh,
And also salt is a very young product as opposed to a living fish, which is quite a different dynamic, we could say, than a mineral.
mhm. Yeah, that's true.
So, Ginat, I don't understand. If sea vegetables are used to clean up the ocean, does that mean the scum of the ocean is in the sea vegetable? I don't understand that.
No, it doesn't mean that it absorbs it. It means that it's a cleansing agent, that it's so strong as a cleanser that it's very good. It cleanses within us as well.
I see. Okay.
They're also amazing sources of minerals. And I
Yeah.
think aging people, especially women, are are really in search of good quality minerals.
On the mineral topic, something that keeps coming up is the ratio of 1 to 7. That's in the macrobiotic philosophy, and it's not in anywhere else in any of the vegetarian
Right, right.
discussions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and sea vegetables clean our blood, just like they clean the ocean. They clean that. Yeah, that's what I've heard or read. And I have to say that Peter Singer, I don't know, I saw him speak over 20 years ago, I'm thinking, and I got his book, and I really am a fan of his, and that he came with the term, he created the term speciesism, and it made such an impact on how I lived my life. When I was a vegan back then.
Yeah.
But so he wasn't into the macro movement then, I think, but I think he was vegan.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I first started being vegetarian way back when in 1978, I did it because in 1975, I got a cat. And by 1978, I didn't think my cat was human, but I thought my cat was a person. She was a non-human person. And there's actually, I later read that American Indians had written articles about non-human persons. But I could see she had personality. She was smart. She could figure things out. She had strong emotions. And it was like, oh, wow. Do I really want to eat animals? And that's why I started being vegetarian.
The people of ethical people, I'm sorry, the people of ethical, they're a group, PETA. They got me, and then I read a book by Carol J. Adams. It's called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And she's a theologian. I think that's what you say. She wrote that book with, the history of meat eating and why we put an A before chicken, so we don't put an A before chicken, so we can depersonalize them, and meat is a mass term. I mean, she really dived in deep on, and that actually helped straighten out, oh, there's a history of meat eating. So, and your presentation today helped further that, but that's what gave me impact. And of course, I didn't like the torture of animals.
Yes.
But I do have a cat, and I was like, how can I make my cat vegetarian?
You
And
can't.
you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is research around creating the same meat as an animal would have. But again,
Right. What I did, I did all the research, and they are obligatory carnivores. And all you have to do is look in their mouth and look in your own mouth, and you'll see why. But I thought, well, what would cats be eating if they were in the wild? They wouldn't be eating cow. They wouldn't be eating lamb. They would be eating bird. So what's the closest bird I can give them? I can't go out and catch songbirds around here, but I can go and buy ground chicken and ground turkey, and that's what I feed them. They don't eat beef. They don't eat lamb. And I make my own food for them, and that's the best I can do. But we didn't create the world as it is, and so there are puzzles and mysteries stronger than we know, that we have to honor. And so I'm not going to try to turn my cat into a vegan. That's against nature, I think.
yeah, and I think in nature itself, there's only a small percentage of animals that actually eat other animals. So again, not a large portion of animals eat other animals.
Right, right. And to an earlier point you were making, it made me think of Colin Spencer, who said that when meat eating first started, and he's digesting a lot of other research, that one of the things that promoted it was that it was a way to express dominance. And if you had more meat and better meat, you were the chieftain, you were the one in charge. So it was a conspicuous consumption. It was a way to display power. And that goes into the sexual politics idea, like about meat and what meat is all about. So something to think on. There's so many aspects to this material that it's really, you're in a forest once you start looking there.
Yeah.
About animals eating animals, I don't know if you've seen all the wonderful classes we've had. We had one with how do you pronounce her name? Sanae? S-A-N-A-E. Sorry. And she gave a cooking class of what she feeds her dogs. And she said, I could eat the same things they eat. It was, it was all grains and beans, and it was wonderful.
There's a video on.
Yeah, like you said, dogs can eat that, but cats are strictly protein.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a video of Sanai Suzuki feeding her dogs her vegan meal, and they are so happy. But they are not cats, correct?
They're not. And it's true. You can, like Dr. Pitcairn's book on animal health that has dogs and cats. He just says flat out, yes, you can turn your dog into a vegetarian. The protein needs are not as high, but don't try it on your cat. Um, so it's the great mystery of nature. And we are murderers. We eat plants all the time. So when you think about it, yeah. The world is one great eating society, right? So, Gnat, you're muted.
Yes, yes, Kathy, you are amazing. I really appreciate your, oh boy, I got to find some good words because you really take the topic and you research it and you put it together and present it so well. It's just a pleasure. I will recommend this video to anybody who wants to research more of this topic. You have a lot to say, and I have a clear sense that you could expand quite a bit more. You know, were you given another few days to present? So it remains for me to thank you and to really applaud you and appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, it was just a joy to be here and to meet all of these wonderful people with their so thoughtful questions.
Come again, come again.
So am I the caboose of the wagon? I think I'm the last one, it just
Kathy,
blows
can I
blows-
ask what you're up to, what you're doing in your daily life, what your main energy goes to?
Oh, sure.
And you know, we say the last is the best.
Oh,
Although I can't really say that.
I just completed my book. I had, this is embarrassing, but I had a contract that I signed in 2010 to write a book for the University of Chicago Press. And it was supposed to be delivered to them in 2 years. And extended and extended and extended because of all my other activities. And then COVID struck and then we were in lockdown. So it's about halfway through. And in the year, I finished the other half and I turned it into the press in June. And so it is now being read by 2 academic readers, which is like what they usually do. And then they give you recommendations for revisions before they put it into production. So I'm doing that. And I've been trying to learn Spanish because it's the second language here in California. And I want to do something about the immigrant situation to help the immigrants. My own background is my father was an immigrant. My mother was the child of immigrants. And it was a friendlier country toward immigrants when they all came here. And so I want to do something. I know a little Italian. And so I'm learning Spanish big time, as fast as I can. I can read it easily, but she's speaking it is a different story. And so I'm working on that. I also sing, and I'm a coloratura soprano, and I take voice lessons on Zoom. And in the fall, we'll be back to the Santa Barbara Master Chorale, and I'll be part of a chorus, which I'm so looking forward to. You may or may not know this, but singers are super spreaders. So we had to be very careful. We had no singing at all last year. And so I'm looking forward to getting back to that. And what else? I'm taking care of my cats. And I do Tai Chi and yoga. So I go to the park now 3 times a week and do yoga in the park in the morning. And yeah, I cook. I spend a lot of time cooking. So I can't think of much else.
I thank you one more time. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, Karen wants to see my cats. Here's one of them. This is